You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Dr. London, it's great to have you back with us. So welcome back to the Final Say Radio Show.
Oh, Brett, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, every time I speak with you, we think that things can't get worse or they can't progressively get worse, but they seem to. And we won't get into the Obamacare yet. We'll save that towards the end. Let's go to the most important two issues in my mind, and it's the Iranian nuclear program, and it's why this administration is being so heavy-handed in trying to force Israel into an agreement with what, my words, not yours, I consider to be two little terrorist states. Gaza.
Well, I can tell you why. I mean, the answer is very obvious. I mean, Obama runs this administration on the basis of what is politically desirable. This was politically desirable. This will be a Chamberlain-like peace arrangement where he will say we have peace in our time, that the tension between the United States and Iran has been reduced, that they're not going to weaponize their missiles, even though they'll have enough fissile material to produce nuclear weapons. And in the end, he'll say this is terrific for the United States. Now, the French are not going to agree, and the Saudis are certainly not going to agree, and Bibi Netanyahu is obviously going to be facing many sleepless nights. But as far as the politics within the United States is concerned, Obama is going to regard this as a great achievement, a great accomplishment, and the press will probably embrace it in precisely that way.
It's really amazing to me because for all these decades, I mean, Yasser Arafat, years back, and numerous times, was offered much more than they'll ever get in any kind of a settlement. And they never accepted it. And I always figured the reason there's never been peace, because I really don't truly believe that they want peace, because I don't think they really want Israel to be there. And I'm not sure that I think many members of Congress understand this, surely not enough, but I don't think that the administration and maybe even the prior administration really grasped that idea.
Well, I think the Bush administration did get it. I mean, in all of the conversations, it's pretty clear that if you talk to the jihadists, their view of the Middle East is a Palestinian state from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. In other words, Israel does not exist. Israel will be evaporated. And that is the view they have. It's not coincidental that the Iranians continually talk about eliminating Israel from the map. Why would they say that? One, it gives them great leverage in other Arab states. That's not an Arab state, but the Persians would have great advantage in other Arab states. So this is the argument that is used across the board in the Middle East. For the United States to play into this, making the Iranians the strong horse in the region by allowing them to possess nuclear weapons, or at least the fissile material for nuclear weapons, is absurd on every level. But as I said, if you regard this as a political achievement, which is the way in which the Obama administration will look at it, they'll say, we've got peace in our time. We've eliminated the tension with Iran. We've got a new age. We turn the chapter into an entirely new era. That's the way it's going to be played. And I think it's going to be very dangerous because rather than bring us peace in our time, it brings us closer to the brink of war.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. John and I were in Jordan just about a month ago, and we were looking at some books by a couple of different spots, and they have books regarding the Middle East and Jordan, and they don't show Israel on the map. They show all the other countries, but they've removed Israel, and I'm sure that's the case in many of these nations. So in a sense, they've already achieved their goal. Now it's just they've taught their populace that Israel shouldn't exist. It doesn't exist. God knows what they really teach them there. But this is something that I think we need to look at. But Herb, I looked at some. I save articles. I've got piles. It's unbelievable. But I'm looking at an article in about mid-August, and it was talking about the senators that approved a resolution to assist Israel in an Iran strike. And this was interesting. The Senate Resolution 65, and when you look at the people who were supporting this, Lindsey Graham, co-sponsored by Robert Menendez, Marco Rubio, Kelly Ayotte, John Cornyn, Chuck Schumer. I mean, this is bipartisan stuff in the Senate supporting Israel. And now I look at where we are today, And I see nothing that tells me that this administration is willing to deal with removing the threat, if necessary, militarily. And I question if they'd even support Israel. I really don't know. I don't know that we have that answer.
They won't even support real sanctions. There are so many nations that have violated the sanction prohibition. Turkey delivers an enormous amount of gold to Iran in return for petrochemicals. So, I mean, there's no doubt that the United States is not adhering to the very UN resolutions it helped to get passed. So I think that what you have is a United States that is no longer willing to play the role of the gatekeeper of the peaceful person or group that would prevent the Iranians from asserting their will across the Middle East. There's no doubt about what the Iranians have in mind. They've talked about the imperial Shia Crescent. What is the Shia Crescent? It's an attempt on the part of the Iranians to be the strong horse in the Middle East, to dominate by the very dint of having nuclear weapons. And it's the nuclear weapons that are not merely a military weapon, but a political weapon, intimidating other nations. In any kind of escalation scenario, what do you do when you get to the point where you want to go to war? They've got nuclear weapons. It's one of the reasons why the Saudis signed an agreement with Pakistan last week to obtain nuclear weapons. Why are they obtaining nuclear weapons? To serve as a deterrent against whatever ambitions the Iranians have. Keep in mind that most of the oil fields in Saudi Arabia are located in Shia territory, not in Sunni territory. So that is a problem for the Saudis to begin with. So they realize that we've got to do something. They'll acquire nuclear weapons even more quickly than the Iranians. Now you will see the Turks saying, fine, we can't rely on the NATO nuclear umbrella anymore, even though we're a member of NATO, and so we want the Saudis to provide us with nuclear weapons. So now you're going to see the proliferation of nuclear weapons across the Middle East, making the area far more dangerous than it is at the moment.
And it's hard to believe that it can be more dangerous, but you're absolutely correct, and excellent point with the location of the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and I think that's to be noted. This whole story, it just shows me, and I'm sure you agree in most sense, that this administration, I question if they really understand what they're doing with regards to the policies, the ramifications of the policy steps that they've taken. And I'll even take it a step further, Herb. I question if they're actually trying to prop up an Iranian-controlled Middle East. And the reason I say that is because it seems like they supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That's clear. He didn't want to take action against Assad in Syria, right or wrong, but he removed Gaddafi from Libya. And when you take a step back and you look at all this, the Saudis are mad at us. We've had decent cooperation from them over the years. The Egyptians have honored a peace treaty for a long time with Israel under Mubarak and Sadat. And then you had Libya, who, yes, he was a very bad guy. I mean, these were all bad people, by the way. But they helped us in the war on terrorism. So then we remove all these friends, but we don't want to take action against Iran. We've been almost silent on Turkey, all the things they've done, not just against us, but against Israel and whatnot. So I really question what the ultimate goal of this administration is with regards to their Mideast policy.
Well, if there is a policy, and again, it's so obscure and it's run by a group of amateurs, but if there is a policy, the policy can be described in one word: transnationalism. That the United States is hoping that there is some sort of international force that will stabilize conditions in the part of the world that is obviously roiling. And the United States does not want to deploy forces in Iraq, in Afghanistan, anywhere else in the world. And so we're saying is, how do we use soft power to bring this about? And the only way is to engage in accommodations. Because if you're unwilling to put power behind negotiations, those negotiations are meaningless. And so we have to concede. The role of the United States is to provide concessions to our former enemies. And our enemies are still our enemies. We call them former enemies. So we use Orwellian logic to make things happen. The past is really the present. The former enemies are really our friends. The former friends are now our enemies. And so this is the world as seen through Obama's lens, because, as I said before, everything is political, And if he can maintain any stability, even if it means jeopardizing American interests, he's perfectly willing to do so.
Yeah, incredible. So, Herbert, if we could switch back to the United States, I'm sure you'd love to comment on this, but we had the governor elections, local elections, and then we had, of course, the New York City mayor. We have a new mayor, or you guys have a new mayor. And you have any thoughts on what New York just did to themselves?
Well, they elected Che Guevara mayor of New York. I mean, what you have is a situation that I regard as very, very dangerous, because 1% of the New York City population pays almost half of all of the taxes. 53% of New Yorkers pay no taxes at all. The 1% that pays the bulk of the taxes, they're largely mobile. They don't have to stay in New York. You know, people are always saying to me, well, the population in New York has remained stabilized at around 8 million people over the last 15 years. Yes, that's true. But what you do not consider are the very wealthy that have left New York, replaced by those who are not so wealthy. So this is not exactly a desirable situation from a tax basis, because if, in fact, you want to raise taxes, you're not going to raise taxes on only the rich. There aren't enough of them. You're going to raise taxes on the middle class, even though that's not said. And if the 12.9% that you pay in city and state taxes is to be increased to, say, 20%, which might occur with the de Blasio. Of course, the state legislature would have to weigh in as well. But assuming it goes up fairly dramatically, a lot of people are going to say, I don't have to stay in New York. If I were to move to Florida tomorrow based on 20% of my income, I could live rent-free. I don't pay a city and state tax. 20% of my income could go into renting an apartment in Florida. I don't even have to leave New York. I just have to be in New York 180 days a year.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And a lot of people do that.
What is happening here is that the naivete on the part of this de Blasio is really remarkable. And what is also remarkable to me is that the class warfare argument still works. Even though you thought Marxism was in the ash heap of history, class warfare works as a political device, because there are always those who believe in Schadenfreude. You know, I mean, these rich guys, they earn the money illegally, they use special privilege in order to get ahead, and so let's nail them. And then the poor are saying, look, I mean, I love the idea of taking from Peter to give to Paul. Paul is always happy about that arrangement. And so they're very satisfied. And if you look at the voting patterns in New York, it's interesting that the white middle class is absolutely unnecessary. You can win the election without them. And if you get 90% of the Hispanic population, 96% of the black population, you can pretty much win the election. And that's precisely what happened. So we're running into a very, very unique set of conditions where the people who pay the bills are now in a distinct minority. And if you reach a tipping point where you're saying to them, your taxes are going to increase dramatically, those people will flee. And you've seen signs of it already, but now you're going to see wholesale movement out of New York by those who have the ability to afford New York City.
Very interesting, and I agree with you. Now, you brought up class warfare, and I noticed a different type of warfare in the campaign in Virginia. And it's, you know, it was almost a campaign of lies and deceitful rhetoric in the ads that McAuliffe was putting out there, painting Cuccinelli, thank you, in a light that simply wasn't true. And I think, unfortunately, I don't know how much of an impact this had, but but obviously the government shutdown had a little bit of an impact, because I think if the focus had been longer on Obamacare, I think Cuccinelli could have pulled this out at the end.
Well, a couple of things that have to be said. Number one, Cuccinelli was outspent 2-1.
Yes.
That's point number one. So that he could buy these ads that perpetrated the lies and the caricature of Cuccinelli. That's number one. Number two, the Libertarian Party was bought by the Democrats. They came into the race, they got 6.6% of the vote. Cuccinelli only lost by 3%. So had the Libertarians not been in this, Cuccinelli would have been the next governor of Virginia. And then the last point that has to be made, had he been able to start a campaign against Obamacare earlier on when he had very little money, but if he had some resources at the beginning of the campaign, right at the outset, he could have nailed the president on Obamacare and that would have generated a lot of votes because he picked up steam. He was down by 10, 12 percentage points. He only lost by 3, and that happened over the last 2 weeks of the campaign, where they kept nailing the president on Obamacare and nailing his opponent on this issue as well. So, again, there were lots of factors that went into it, but money clearly was a factor, and buying the Libertarian Party was a factor. And you can be sure that across the country they will get that message. The Democrats realize, look, let's sponsor the Libertarian Party. They're more likely to take votes from Republicans than Democrats. And wherever there's a close race and you need 3 or 4% of the vote, you get it through the Libertarians, even though the Democrats clearly do not share the view of the Libertarians.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And I did notice the various articles of different people who were pumping money into that race to support that candidate, and it was evident. And by the way, it's actually really no different than what we saw with the presidential election, having so many people really just stay home, whether they were conservative or very religious people or Tea Party, whoever stayed home. You had millions of people who didn't vote in this election that voted for McCain. And,
well, it's also true in New York City. I mean, what happened in this mayoral election is only 23% of eligible voters actually turned out. So there was a kind of disinterest, or lack of interest, I should say, in this campaign. And that, I think, was a real problem. Lota didn't get his own base excited, and de Blasio did manage to appeal to his base, but only a portion of the base large enough to win handily. And I think that's a real problem. As I said, the 1% of the population that controls the taxes in New York is such a small minority that it has no interest, no ability to win an election. And that's become a real problem for the Republican Party. Unless it can somehow revise its message, the Republican Party will be a permanent minority. It's 6-1 registration in New York City, and that is true across the country. So the Republicans have got to do something in turning this around.
Yeah, and it's not just message. I think the Republican Party and all the components need to stop fighting and figure out how to deal with each other and recognize that the enemy are those who are trying to forever change this nation. And
well, you've got to win in order to be successful, and the Republicans have to realize that. If you have a fractured party, you can't win. And so ultimately the party has got to come together. And if they want to be a permanent minority, that's easy. That can be achieved if Rand Paul goes to war against mainline Republicans, if Boehner runs the House as if he is the only Republican congressman in the House, then I think you have got a real problem. But if the Republican Party comes together and conceivably develops a message that appeals to all Americans, then I think the party has a real shot at capturing the presidency in the next election, even if Hillary Clinton is the candidate of the Democratic Party.
Which brings me to the last question and the last point before I let you go, and that is Chris Christie. I found it, well, we all knew the Democratic opponent, Bono, had no chance at all, so that race was done the second they both won their primaries. And but it was interesting to me listening to some of the things that Christie said. He initially came out taking some shots against the Tea Party and calling himself, I am a conservative, and so on and so forth. He pulled back on that a little bit, realizing that he probably went a little bit beyond where he should have. But it's interesting because I see him as, now he's not my choice to run for president, but I definitely think that he's going to throw his hat into the ring.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. He's in it. I mean, the smart money in New York is all gravitating to him. I happen to think that he was wildly wrong about the Tea Party. I mean, the Tea Party has been so badly maligned that it's like using the word fascist when you talk about the Tea Party. These are basically grassroots people who are deeply disturbed about the insidious expansion of the federal government. What they're saying is, look, we're basically constitutionalists. We believe in liberty. We believe in limited government, and that's what we stand for. I mean, I don't know how anyone who examines the position of the Tea Party can come to any other conclusion. To describe the Tea Party as a group of extremists is bizarre. Now, at the same time, the Tea Party has to be incorporated into the Republican Party. You can't have a Tea Party and a Republican Party. You've got to create some sort of marriage between the two. And the point that you made before about the party coming together, I think is the essential one, and it's critical. And Christie has to understand that. So if he wants to run for president of the United States, he's going to have to be a lot more accommodating than he has been in dealing with people in New Jersey. It's one thing to say to someone who asks a question he doesn't like and to respond in an intemperate way. It's quite another thing if you're running for president and the temperament of the man is being measured. It's also true that while New Jersey is something of a liberal state, you've got to deal not only with the New Jerseys in the United States, you've got to deal with the Ohios and the Illinois where people don't necessarily know Christie. And so there's an awful lot that has to happen between now and 2016 if he is going to be the nominee of the party.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with all what you just said. I want to give a quick plug. I've been reading a lot of the stuff that you guys have been putting up at the londonCenter.org, some very interesting articles, so I want our listeners to go there. But anything else you'd like to plug before we let you go?
Well, we always are interested in getting response to the pieces that we put online. So it's the London Center for Policy Research, and we are very, very eager to see new readers. So please come aboard. Let us know whether the things that we have to say make any sense. So I would certainly love to hear from your listeners. And again, thank you. Always a pleasure to be with you, Brett.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Again, it's the great Dr. Herb London, who's the London Center for Policy Research, great conservative and fantastic the work that he's done. And you just listen to his answers and his responses, and he's got a complete pulse of everything that's going on. It's very interesting. I love speaking with him.